Good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Andy Ford. I'm Professor of Systems in the Built Environment here at London South Bank University School of Built Environment and Architecture. So first, apologies for the technology delay. I was desperately trying to make things work and couldn't. So welcome first to this seminal event. It's designed to showcase some of the main forward-thinking sustainability and climate action activities that take place at London South Bank University. And where better to start than the School of the Built Environment and Architecture, and in particular, a closer look at our climate emergency debate series, which Pippa will be talking about shortly. The London South Bank University climate debates were launched in December 2019, and it's part of our institution's direct response to the UK Parliament's declaration of an environmental and climate emergency in May 2019. The built environment is a major contribution to climate change, and no surprise, as the built environment encompasses everything, really, all the human-made physical spaces where we live, play, work, and it's not just our buildings, homes, schools, universities, offices, and all the physical spaces where we live. Includes the roads, our utilities, and all other human-made infrastructure, which is why, by the way, we moved the engineers, the civil engineers and the building services engineers out of engineering into the School of the Built Environment at LSBU, so that we could interact more closely with people in the built environment to get our actions together there. The carbon emissions generated by the built environment could risk being overlooked in the mainstream discourse around climate change and carbon reduction. The built environment is just there in the background. Its impact less visible perhaps than car and plane pollution, than waste and recycling. The built environment can seem less negotiable than, say, travel, where we have some agency over where we go and by what means. But we all have to live somewhere, work somewhere, learn something. And the places we live, work, study, this massive, complex built environment accounts for almost 40% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. And this isn't the only impact, because wherever man builds, covering nature with houses and roads, emitting pollution, discharging waste, we're also having a significant impact on the planet's natural habitats. Which means sustainable design is critical to any discipline within the built environment, whether it be engineering, services, or architecture, and all of them need to work together. And the drive for sustainability, that constant striving for ecological balance, for optimal performance, has to be a truly collective process. We're all aware the breakdown in global climate and biodiversity is the most pressing issue of our time. And resolving climate breakdown is not optional. It's critical to mankind's survival on this planet. Debates about how we design, legislate, measure, and optimize building performance have raged for years. But to date, we believe our sector has failed to pull its weight and play its full part. This is a travesty. When the radical act of decarbonising the built environment will make such a significant contribution to the UK's commitment to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And we feel LSBU is key to seeing that commitment comes to fruition. LSBU's reach into industry, our sector expertise, and our unique mix of academic and vocational knowledge is pivotal. We understand the low carbon technology and technical requirements. The skills sets needed to decarbonise the built environment already exist. It's what we do. But we know from bitter experience that it's not just expertise or technology that's required. We need to drive collaboration, engender the political will, and remove economic barriers to this enormously challenging task. We firmly believe it can be done, which is why LSBU's Climate Emergency Series a lively programme of debates and workshops was conceived. It's about getting things done. They have one single-minded focus, addressing how the built environment should respond to the climate emergency. We've purposely made them challenging and engaging forums to stimulate much-needed debate, moving the conversation forwards while underpinning LSBU's commitment to creating a culture of debate and furthering knowledge of our students. By their very nature, these feisty, provocative debates foster the principles of both knowledge exchange and the concept of debating issues amongst all of us, a critical skill in virtually every discipline across the sector. And when we say all disciplines, LSBU has just that. Our School of the Built Environment is one of the UK's largest and straddles architecture, building services, civil engineering, construction management, project management, property and real estate studies, building surveying and quantity surveying. These debates also underpin LSBU's BEA's commitment to sharing knowledge and ideas between academic institutions, industry and policymakers. My colleague Pippa, who you've just met by mistake, I think, is the curator of the debate series. Will later show us some first launch debate slides, where we launched our debate and some real life opportunities for influence, discourse and practice. We're creating these change makers for tomorrow. We've been arguing about how to achieve zero carbon homes for 10 years at least. We've been debating how to retrofit the UK's leaky housing stock and make it fit for purpose for the 21st century for even longer. Financial and political crises have delayed process. Now we face economic disaster and a global pandemic, and we're running out of time, so we must act. You're about to hear about our first debate in January 2020 and how it stimulated such actions. On the 20th of January 2020, in another world where hundreds of attendees were all allowed to get together and cram into one room, we hosted a really lively debate in partnership with the Passivhaus Trust, proponents for forward-thinking building design that virtually eliminates carbon usage in a building. Just what the world needs. The debate was supported by LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, who are champions of the race to net zero buildings. We had a lot of young, lively minds in the room, along with some old hands, some real seniors of the discipline, some of whom have been having these conversations for many, many years. As we delved into perceptions about the Passivhaus standard, we also sought to understand real-life obstacles. What is preventing the world from doing what it needs to do? The debate produced a wealth of valuable data and some cutting-edge insights. Those findings went on to inform further investigations, all of which added to our body of knowledge and is now shaping the strategy that we're preparing to take industry leaders and government in response to the post-COVID economy. So far, our sector has failed to deliver on its climate goals. As we face a real, almost unstoppable climate emergency, we need to change that. And that's why the debates are critical, because the time for talking is over and the call for action has begun. So if I could pass over now to Pippa, and she'll carry forward. Thank you.
There you are. Hello, hello. So our first debates, yes, back in the days when people were all allowed to gather in one room, it feels like a different world. We had a very, very engaging audience. We had really superb panelists, and they came up with some very interesting thoughts. And the reason we were talking about Passivhaus was because Passivhaus is a leading international low energy design standard, and there are more than 65,000 buildings designed and built and tested to this standard worldwide. they're more expensive to build marginally, but they're much more efficient and cheaper to run, and in terms of carbon emissions are stellar in reducing the need for the carbon generating energy requirements. So there are some exemplars. Goldsmith Street in Norwich, a Passivhaus council scheme, won the Rebus Sterling Prize in 2019. And there's also Retrofit, Passivhaus. And just to give you a taste of why Passivhaus is so important in terms of comfort, fuel poverty, and carbon savings terms. One resident from the Manchester Council estate that was retrofitted 5 years ago summed up, in the past we had to use fan heaters because it was so cold, and because we couldn't afford to put on the radiators. We would get through 12 to 13 pounds a day just to run the heaters. 12 to 13 pounds a day to run the heaters. I have never had to put the heating on since it's been redone. And if that doesn't speak to the power of what Passivhaus could do, I don't know what does. So we had the a wonderful panel, Claire Murray from Levy Bernstein, also of LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, the Emma Osmondson, Exeter County Council, and a member of the Passivhaus Trust, and both of those spoke of the small price for the enormous environmental gains. And in particular, Emma Osmondson spoke about the development premium, where you had enormous human and habitation gains just by building in this intelligent way. On the other side of the debate, we had Rob Pennell of the Buildings Hub, formerly of the Zero Carbon Hub. The UK construction industry, he felt, wasn't ready to meet Passivhaus standards. And you can imagine LSBU having some thoughts there. And Chris Twin of Twin Sustainability Innovation, against the motion, but actually saying you could have an alternative approach and you could get carbon savings at the same cost and still get mass market viability. So what we're hearing here is expense is not the predominant inhibitor to large-scale adoption. But the other thing that came out of this debate was that people were talking about the pressing need to decarbonize the existing stock. Just have to work out how to work two screens, people, bear with me. So we're very, very keen that the debates are not just a talking shop, that they actually feed into research and action and the collaborations that we develop. And so two research teams came out of this. One was the Zero Carbon Homes legislation failure. We'd been working on, many of the team at LSB have been working on zero carbon homes policy 10 years ago. And it actually came out in 2007 when the UK government's Building a Greener Future policy statement stated that all new homes must be zero carbon by 2016. And if you check your calendars, we're way past that date, because after 9 years of discussion with house builders, all the gearing up of the supply chain, in July 2015, the policy was dropped by the Treasury 6 months before its expected implementation. And that in house building terms is a very, very last minute change. And it was given as an attempt to speed up house building, but we were involved back in the day, and we wanted to know what went wrong, how could this have happened. The second research team came out first was, should we look at existing stock or new build, either or both. Lots of binary thinking there. Every time you talk about new build, people say, yeah, but what about the old stock? And every time you talk about the old stock, people say, yeah, but you're still building these houses. And we're really looking at this binary thinking and saying, why not both? But actually, the real question for us is, why not either? Why is this almost being done on a voluntary basis? And what are the barriers to doing it well and doing it right and doing it at scale? So certainly the existing stock is as neglected as new build in legislative terms. And since 2012, tackling energy efficiency in existing homes has just dropped off a cliff, and partly that decline has been blamed on the Green Deal scheme, which was launched in 2012. But didn't take off, didn't get traction, and was axed 3 years later. The criticisms were it was too complicated, it was poorly implemented. So we really, really wanted to dive in and look at these things and see what went wrong. That was our mantra from this, what went wrong. And lots of conversations, lots of research, lots of digging in. So the zero carbon legislation failure we looked at, and that was really interesting. I'm going to summarize a lot of research very quickly and give you the sort of the very top line. I could have the whole day session to talk about this if I was allowed, but very, very quickly. I'm going to focus on a report from the Common Select Committee that really scrutinized this. It scrutinizes the policy, spending and administration of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, including the Committee on Climate Change. So these are really, really digging into what's going on out in the real world, and their conclusions are damning. Zero carbon legislation in 2016 was derailed because of developer lobbying. And what seems to have happened in a nutshell was they leveraged economic fears, a recession coming, and cost myths. It's too expensive to do it. And they positioned that zero carbon standards were prohibitive. They couldn't possibly deliver this at those costs and still, be in business. Well, the outcome from this strategy committee, select committee investigation was, first of all, there was scandalous rates of developer profit versus the cost of actually putting in those zero carbon standards. And one builder who is named in that report, their 2018 new build, so that would have been the ones that came immediately after the 2016 legislation went, they would have cost them £165 million to meet zero carbon standards. And that might sound like an eye-watering sum until you read that they paid their managers, their senior managers, in bonuses, just bonuses, not the salaries, not the other costs, £600 million. And 75 million of that went to their CEO. And yet they were claiming that they could not afford 165 million to build to zero carbon standards. And the second thing that comes out of that makes it even more scandalous is that there's a disproportionate refit cost versus meeting those costs up front, because building up front is exponentially cheaper. Retrofitting, going in after the event and putting it right, costs 5 times more than the upfront cost, that small uplift. So it becomes very, very prohibitive for us. It just adds to the stock of buildings that are not performing the way they should, that are emitting carbon that need not be emitted, because profit margins and shareholder returns, and I quote this is verbatim from the report, profit margins and shareholder returns are the overriding priority for the most large house builders. They will not upgrade their standards without being required to do so by regulation. And I would say, to balance this, there is an enormous amount of voluntary, willful, it's not even compliance, pushing forward of the technology and the barriers, and really exploring how to build homes brilliantly by many ethical builders, but at the lion's share, the profit margins come first, and carbon emissions don't feature. So the other thing, the point that the committee made was, despite receiving billions in taxpayer funds, the house builders will not do what's right. They are holding back progressive house builders who want to go further. And if you look at the billions of taxpayer support, billions of pounds of taxpayer support via the Help to Buy scheme, why are we letting it being used to build dwellings that will need to be retrofitted later, up to 5 times the cost of designing in appropriate standards from the start? So it's nonsensical. And so that was a very, very important piece of research, that actually the economic argument of not doing it just does not hold water. And we'll come on to this new economic climate we find ourselves in. We then look at retrofits, the barriers to entry for retrofit. Let me twiddle my slides there. And again, where market forces alone are insufficient, improving the energy efficiency is actually deemed by the same select committee as an infrastructure priority. And that's a very, very key thought, because up till now, it's been managed, it's sort of been done piecemeal, and there hasn't been that top-down strategic view. And buildings are sort of there, they're in our lives, we live in them, we work in them, we study in them, we have hospitals, etc. We don't necessarily view them as infrastructure in the same way that we do roads and other energy systems, but they are so systemically important to the carbon we use and the way we live and health, wealth and planet. So it's really critical we actually start to and push for the government to take this on as an infrastructure priority. And the second thing that came out was there are systemic barriers to actually stopping retrofit markets taking hold, and the root causes of that remain unresolved. And we had a really interesting paper how to succeed at retrofit. In fact, the paper here is a 2017 paper written by Dr. Aaron Gillick and Professor Ford, my colleague here, from CEREB, which is the Centre for Efficient and Renewable Energy in Buildings. It's a research centre, which Andy will be talking about on Wednesday, the 24th at 11 a.m. So I won't go into detail about CEREB, except to say it does phenomenal research into the practical elements of low carbon energy design. So this paper is really, really interesting because it looks at 41 thermal retrofit programs in the US, their Better Buildings Neighborhood program. And the outcome of this was they found the optimal model, which is 14 program steps organized under 5 main themes, which is about the program design, it's about marketing and outreaching and creating awareness, it's about workforce engagement, closing skills gaps, it's about financial incentives, that very fine balance of grants versus loans, the combinations that work, about data and evaluation and iterative program improvements. And this 14-point model gives us a really robust framework when it comes to scoping and designing large-scale retrofit programs that actually work, that actually take hold, that actually get done. So we have the know-how, we don't have the political will, and that is what we need to push for. So we're doing our research and we're planning our next debates, and then boom, along comes COVID and derails a lot of things for a lot of people. The danger is that you could say, well, there's a recession, stop spending on anything. But actually what we know from infrastructure projects is that they actually do yield way more in terms of economic benefits than the investment. So large stimulus packages are really, really called for. And there's very good evidence that this works. So this gives us an opportunity to retool our economy to support sustainable development and invest in the stimulus packages and focus on some major infrastructure projects. And amid all the articles that started to emerge calling for us to build back better, which is a post-disaster bricks and mortar mantra in developmental terms, this build back better mantra started to emerge. And one paper that really caught our attention was called A Net Zero Emissions Economic Recovery from COVID-19, the sort of thing that makes our heartbeats really fast. And we loved it. It's from the Oxford Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, and it was conducting a survey of G20 finance and central bank officials, asking them which infrastructure investment would pay dividends. And which sustainable development projects would best serve society and help reboot the economy. And I've highlighted on that slide that you can see the items T and U, clean energy, infrastructure and buildings upgrades, score very well on the economic multipliers and positive climate impacts. So far from derailing things, in fact, the post-COVID economic situation and the need for stimulus packages gives us a really big open door to kick open and say we must take this opportunity. So long as we learn from past mistakes and we look at past successes, we have a body of knowledge, we know how to design these retrofit programs. This can be done. The question then comes to, in practical terms, whether we have a green revolution or whether we just go for a bit of insulation, whether we go for a major rollout or whether we go for an optional buy-in, whether we tinker with EPCs or whether we radically reform the way we think about energy in homes. So we're looking very much at taking as a systems thinking approach. If you consider that 2/3 of homes fail on energy efficiency, 80% of the building stock is already built. That how do we do this and do it well and do it properly? And so we've started to delve into the systems thinking approach, where current policy and programs tend to play at the bottom end with very low leverage, and the least transformative interventions, they're incremental. The EPCs, the Green Deal, the policy nudges, they're kind of tinkering around the edges of a very major problem. If we can decarbonize our housing stock in this with this stimulus package, we can make a radical shift. And we're keen that the world starts to look at it in this larger way, that we look at how information is flowed, as came out of the designing optimal retrofit. Information flow is critical. Further up the scale, the goal of the system, is this voluntary? Is this energy efficiency and lower heating bills now? Or are we doing this to protect the planet's future? We must look at the mindset or paradigm that actually forms the system, all the goals and the structure and the rules. Are we reducing heat, for example? Are we lowering bills? Or are we brave enough to question why heat? Are we going to keep saying, you cool your building and I'll heat mine, and pay to do both? Or are we going to intelligently connect communities so heat loss becomes heat gain? And so we actually start to look at the system in the round and look at the way we use energy overall. And it's the same sort of big questions that Matt Toombs was discussing when he's talking about transport, when he's talking about other systems and major reductions. This is systems thinking rather than small incremental changes. And we also look at the power to transcend paradigms. A really great example that we can learn on. I said earlier about learning from previous experience. A great example that we could look to was the 1990s dash for gas, which was when the newly privatized electric companies moved to generate electricity using natural gas rather than coal. Now that didn't just happen, it took political will. It took the nudge of privatization. It required regulatory change. It needed opportunism, like making most of the economic circumstances, and also the newly unleashed regional electricity companies seeking to diversify. And the recent development of North Sea oil, capitalizing on that. And in infrastructure terms, these formidable paradigm shifts collectively revolutionized energy production in the UK. It was a galvanized approach to make something happen. And it takes political will, it takes change, it takes bravery, but it can be done. And we did it then, and we could do this now. So we're advocating for a similar paradigm shift in order to maximize the impact of any stimulus package that it comes to the built environment. So as we move on, we are working on the debate series. The very important point about this is that the mantra of the debates is it is about the debates and having those conversations and bringing people together, but it is also about the knowledge exchange that follows, and it is also about the change that we engender and how that feeds into LSBU's research and position on these matters. And so we're currently, from the work we've done on the first debate, starting to put together a rapid response to the post-COVID-19 environment we find ourselves in. And we're looking at developing, in the process of developing, a call to action. that is, we're consolidating and articulating the research outcomes, and we're looking at bringing these strategic endeavors into one radical vision, which is a roadmap for a major retrofit infrastructure level project. And we feel uniquely placed as a forward-thinking and authoritative voice because we have that high-level strategic thinking, we have the practical expertise, we have the sector training, we have reaches far into the industry, we have case studies where we know these things can be done. But obviously, we alone can't do it, and we're really interested in collaborating with other institutions and across industry and bringing people together to help influence government and industry and the decision makers to understand what the right thing is, to shape what that right thing is, what the vision looks like, and to push for us to do the right thing. We want to go beyond finance and information, you know, where you say, here's some money, here's a leaflet, want to change? Beyond those incremental models where we just do some insulation and encourage double glazing, for example, you know, for instance. We want to look at this holistically, adopt a systems thinking approach, and look at the radical redesign of the way we look at energy within our homes and our schools and our offices and buildings. And a key part of this is actually aligning public policy to protect future generations. At the moment, we are allowing the lobbying bodies, the house builders, to say, no, we want to make profit now. And we can't do this anymore. We feel very, very strongly. And when we look at the Welsh Act, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act of 2015, actually has written into legislation that public bodies in Wales have to evaluate the long-term impact of their decisions to prevent these persistent problems such as poverty, health inequalities, and climate change. And it's really critical because our built environment doesn't just emit carbon, it emits a lot of carbon, but it affects people, it affects their health, and it affects their wealth. It locks people into fuel poverty. It engenders ill health within unfit buildings, sick buildings. It has a massive impact on the planet and actually has a massive impact on the wealth of the nation. So we need to change what the legacy we have of these buildings that are not performing. And we need to do it in a big way. And we're pushing for a paradigm shift on the scale of the dash for gas. We're looking for the fiscal alignment so that people, planet, and profit are put into this given priority, equal priority, rather than just profit trumping everything at the moment. The building environment exerts such a strong influence on each aspect of the triple bottom line, you know, people, planet, profit. And we think now is the time for us to come together and put pressure on those decision makers to not just do it, but to do it right and to deliver exponential gains across the triple bottom line. So we're very excited to discover that technology allows us to have these wonderful debates still. So we have had to take pause, like many organizations, and think what we do next and how we move forward. And we have got a little agenda lined up. So in July, we're looking to host a change maker and leaders workshop, and we're already talking to people across industry, and anybody who's listening who wants to be involved, please come and speak to us, because we really want to be working with change makers and leaders who are interested in this paradigm shift. We're working on the white paper and the call to action that will be published, we hope, in August 2020. I say we hope because I'm not writing that paper, so I feel very loath to actually give a deadline for something that I'm not writing, but I know that they're hard at work. Aaron and Jules Saunderson are hard at work. And in September, on the 17th of September, we got a debate lined up. We're titling it quite provocatively, Go Big or Go Home. And we say this House believes that any post-COVID stimulus package should include a national infrastructure level decarbonising programme. If you're going to have a stimulus package, that has to be in there. And it should reach beyond the incremental to systemically and radically transform our building stock for future generations. And we will be seeking speakers and for and against. We want to look really dig into what those barriers are. We want to look at the costs. We want to look at the practicalities. We want to really hear from the people who will be delivering why it can be done, why they think it can't be done, because if there's a barrier, we're there to help break it down and have those big conversations. It needs to be done. So what we'd really like everyone to do is sign up to the Climate Emergency Debate Series. There's a little form online that you can just put your interest down, and we'll be back in touch with you and give you the details. And really, the big outcome of this is if you join the debates, you're going to be helping shape the future. These are a massive opportunity for us to stimulate conversation and debates across the sector, across industry, exchange knowledge, uncover those barriers, knock down the obstacles, and inspire change. And change is what this is all about. So I think that's probably comes to the end of my speaking slot. We're ready for questions for Andy and myself, mostly for Andy, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pippa. That's fantastic. I'm really exciting to hear about that, and I'm really looking forward to working with you and Andy on the event series. And if you could just unmute your mic, ready for questions, that would be great. Thank you. So we've got one question that's come up in the chat box so far. Why can't homes run off their own independent water turbines for electricity instead of being on the electricity board grid?
Well, I think it comes down to probably the key point, really, that one needs to understand how much energy you are using and what energy actually is. So in our homes, if you were to look at what we have as a problem, a very large amount of that is actually heat. If we did an analysis for the UK Green Building Council when it launched, and it shows about 80% of the problem of decarbonising the built environment is actually heating in our existing homes. So yes, you could have a turbine that would work when it rained, and it would drive generation of some electricity. Perhaps that's not the only way forward. You can certainly also have photovoltaic panels. They will generate a lot of electricity during the period the sun shines. Also, whenever you look at these renewable problems, the issue is about it happens and then it doesn't happen. And when it happens, may not be the same time as you need it to use it. So the challenge is, what do you do? What do you do? You've got loads of electricity in the middle of summer because you've got a photovoltaic panel, and blow me, it's not very cold, and you don't need to run your washing machine that day. So what are you going to do now? You have to put it somewhere. You have to put the energy away. Now, the great thing about buildings is that they're actually batteries. So we are going as a country through a great big challenge of trying to become world leaders in battery manufacture, which is very important for electricity. However, buildings store heat. And when we talked about Passivhaus, for instance, what we're basically talking about is how do you balance the amount of heat that's coming into a building with the amount of heat that's being generated by people within the building and being lost from a building. It's stored in the fabric of that building. And that's really key to how we might progress. So could we use rain to create energy? For sure you could. It's just not very much, and it's not at the right moment. So there's maybe other things we should think about first.
Thank you. Josie would like to know, in regards to the triple bottom line, what does profit mean and for whom?
In regards to the triple bottom line, what does profit mean and for whom? Is that a question for me? Because I like profit. Curiously enough, I like money.
I'm happy to answer it. I think actually what we're looking for in economic terms, that there's starting to be a radical shift and a question about the principles of capitalism, and whether it's sort of profit capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, where all the stakeholders in the system prosper, rather than a select few with the money being driven upwards to a select few. So when we're talking about the triple bottom line, it's a really good question. I'm really pleased you've actually raised that, because what we're talking about when we talk about profit, we really mean prosperity. We mean the circulation of money. That we mean that across the board, stakeholders are able to prosper with the circulation of funds, rather than the current model we have, where the profit is for the particularly organisations where shareholder dividends are more important than the longer term view. So there is actually a move to re-examine some of these fundamental economic principles that we're currently working to. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's certainly the way I would see it.
Can I just add something to that? Because I agree with you, and it's part of the reason where we want to see housing as infrastructure. But one of the problems we have is in the construction industry is that it's called the construction industry. And then there's another thing, which is the property industry. And then there's all these things called homes, which are our individual ownership, or owned by lots of thousands of different ways. But the real challenge is actually to turn the idea of building not into a project where you make money and then you build another one, you make money, you build another one, but into something that is long-term and provides us with a steady income. And I say us, I mean people within the industry who wish to be engaged. So I don't know whether that helps or not, but it frustrates me that we think of, and I don't mean to hammer the house builders because they're quite important to get things done, but actually we need a long-term way of running things, not to just build projects and have a construction industry that works on a tiny profit margin and crashes every 5 or 10 years. And that breaks up any long-term planning. We need to find a way of tying property profit and construction profit together with the need of people.
Just goes back to that theme around collaboration.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Next question. Any thoughts on One Planet developments, which seems a very progressive initiative?
I definitely support One Planet developments and One Planet living. I think it's a great way to think of things. I think the Passivhaus has been argued as being a very narrow sort of way of looking at things, but One Planet living, for sure, that's a really good way of approaching life.
Thank you. Pippa, did you want to elaborate on that at all? Or?
Yes, I think actually One Planet's thinking is very much in line with the system thinking that I'm a bit of a flag waver for, because it's actually changing the entire perspective of looking at what we're doing from the bottom up and saying, actually from the top down, if we look at this, we have one planet. How does this affect our future on the planet, our footprint on that planet, the long-term goals of us living on this one planet and utilizing the resources? That changes, that question changes the perspective of what we're trying to do within any given set of circumstances. So actually One Planet living is a fantastic example of the paradigm shift in system thinking. So absolutely right behind it. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another one. Do you feel that we need to change the way we do building regulations, taking a more integrated approach with, say, Part L and Part F being connected? And in this context, do we need to have a code type standard which set the long-term aspirational direction for the industry to build the capacity in the industry and build confidence?
It's a really long question, to which
Big
I might
question.
say yes. So it's sort of, I mean, I agree with you completely. It's about how tying all these things together. No, I mean, Pippa mentioned that there was this plan for zero carbon buildings, actually zero carbon buildings or zero carbon new build by 2019. Zero carbon homes was supposed to be 2016. The Zero Carbon Hub was doing some great work, looking at how it could be made sustainable for the building industry, for the house builders to build zero carbon. It needs that sort of thinking. It brought together academics, construction industry professionals, developers, institutions. All those need to come together, and we need to then say, all right, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, and these are where we will be in 5, 10 years time. Now, that is sort of our ambition. It's a big one, and it's not just me for sure, or Pippa for sure is going to sort it all out, but we do need to have a clear, agreed way forward. It failed last time. It failed because it's too hard, and there's people with different views. This time, we want to talk to all those people with those other views, but with it clear in our mind that there is no choice. This has to be achieved, which means there will be changes, which we don't know what they might be, and they will be bigger than just the construction industry. But we need to find a way to make this happen. Turning the decarbonising of our homes into an infrastructure project spanning the next 30 years would transform the life of everybody in this country. If we could get rid of heating costs, we could get rid of running costs, just imagine how good that would be. And if you've ever lived in a comfortable home, sadly, there's not that many people in this country who have, because we're all living in ancient homes or Victorian homes or 1960s homes. They're bloody uncomfortable. Quite frankly, it's ridiculous. You do not need to put a lot of energy into a home to make it a good, comfortable, healthy place to live. That's what we need to do. And we need a plan.
Thank you. Going back to OPD, could you please explain what OPD are for our attendees that don't know?
Yeah.
Development.
What?
What? So where are OPDs coming from?
It was the question we asked before. Any thoughts on One Planet Development? Which seems
Oh, sorry, One Planet Development. Oh, right. Okay.
I haven't shortened it to OPDs. I'm sorry.
No.
One Planet Development in is it's a unique. Let me just. Sorry, I'm going to read from their principles.
No worries. We'll go to the next question while you're doing that. Pippa.
Okay.
If that's okay. Very interesting presentation. What do you think about the idea of a UK National Investment Bank to support a post-COVID-19 sustainable infrastructure recovery plan and beyond?
It sounds like an interesting idea and a good idea, probably. What I want to make sure is what we think of infrastructure as. So yes, as long as it includes our homes specifically.
Thank you. Next question. Insulating buildings seems big on the cutting carbon agenda. Solar panels used to be big on roofs, but not so high on the agenda anymore. Have we now got good battery backup power where solar energy can be stored during the day for use after hours?
Yeah, I think the problem is things come onto the agenda and go off the agenda, but the truth of the matter is they're all required. We have much improved batteries. They're really improving all the time. That isn't enough on its own. We have done a lot of work here, for instance, on heat pumps and joining buildings together, because some buildings are cooling when others are heating. So you can share heat between buildings. you can do all sorts of things. So we need an awful lot more renewable energy. We need to push down the amount of energy any individual building needs, and we need to do it across the board. Now, that isn't the only thing. So what was the question in detail again? Remind me what was supposed to say. I've forgotten. What?
Just going back to it. Have we now got good battery backup power where solar energy can be stored during the day for use after hours?
I think the answer to that is we're definitely getting there. And as we move to using electric cars and plugging those into our buildings, effectively they have very good batteries within them. And most of the time they are not being used to drive 200 or 300 miles. They're being used to drive 10 or 12 miles. And that leaves a large amount of battery backup, which can be integrated into our building stock.
Thank you. We've got time for 2 more questions. Pippa, do you want me to come over to you first, just to get back to?
Yeah, shall I quickly do the one planet?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Caught on the hoof there trying to describe it, but actually it's basically looking at the genuinely affordable and sustainable way to live, and at the heart of that is actually measuring how much of the Earth's resources each of our actions take. For example, when the Victorians designed water systems and the faucet tap, and you could just open a tap and this lovely system and it just glugged out into the sea or whatever, no one thought to measure how much, as we industrialize the use of that water, how much we used and what the footprint was upstream and downstream. And now we're looking at every single aspect of our life, our consumption, our activities, our movement, our habitation, and looking at how much we're taking from the Earth's resources in order to do so, and optimizing that impact so that we preserve the resources of the planet, not just in the things we do, but upstream and downstream, and the broader picture of how our energy consumption, our water consumption, our food consumption actually has an impact on the planet. So it's about measuring and quantifying and optimizing.
Thank you very much. We've got time for 2 more questions that are in the Q&A box. If anyone has put anything in the chat box, we will try and get back to you. Thank you for the presentation. One of the most important leverage point in the system is mindset change. Do you think behavioural change is going to be a leverage point to achieve net zero homes? How can we as people develop enduring behavioural change to catalyse change and help reduce household carbon emissions?
Well, that's so interesting because the psychology of behaviour change, just as we're looking now at the holistic picture and saying we need to really, really understand the economics and reshape the economics, we also have to understand and reshape the human behavior. And there are several ways of doing this, and it's a field that is very, very well studied. Policy is only one tiny part of behavior change. There are other ways of doing it. Andy, when I first started working with Andy many years ago, he used the example of having a heating dial. You know, you've got a heating knob on the central heating, and it gets colder, you just ramp it up. You can change that entire system by not having a dial. You can edit out, you can design out the human behaviors in some of the systems, you can legislate for it, you can make it the default. There are lots of different ways of doing it, but utterly we must change. And the design of the systems is going to be one of the key ways of doing it, in the same way that the digitization of the economy, there are huge drives to get people to change their behavior. It's more than just getting granddad in a remote village to log on or know how to go on the internet. It's actually about looking at how digitization works through supply chains, works through entire systems. We will need to do the same about behavior change. It's very, very key. So utterly, yes, behavior change is going to be key to this.
Thank you. And we've just got time for one more question. Could local authorities be made responsible for implementing a carbon reduction strategy instead of the energy companies getting a levy? Should this be added to, say, council tax? local CHP, I'm not entirely sure what that here is, and district heating schemes, for example, are more retrofitting to create greener homes. How could this be incentivized? For example, rerun of previous schemes?
Well, it does seem counterintuitive to sort of get the money from the energy companies to reduce the amount of energy is used. I agree with that. And ultimately, I think it's not the way you would sensibly do it. The local authorities, many of them are extremely keen and very good, some of them, on ways to decarbonize. Quite a lot have declared climate emergencies, and they're actively looking for the knowledge and expertise that they've lost over the years to enable them to do these things. If you go back to the time when I started in industry, local authority architecture departments were leading the way in terms of getting buildings done properly. They vanished. The expertise within local government has been depleted a long, long way. Similarly, I think the technical knowledge and expertise in government as a whole has sort of shifted downwards, and it has to outsource it. So I think, yes, local authorities, cities, these are the ways to get places. Where the money comes from, that's a good question. We're all going to have to pay one way or another, but it's the same level as this pandemic we're dealing with. It's how do we balance it out between the generations? It's a very, very long-term thing.
Thank you both very much. There are lots of questions in the chat box and a couple more in the Q&A box. If you have got time to get back to any of them, that would be fantastic. But we're going to move on to the session now. Thank you, Andy and Pippa, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
do
very
join
much.
up to the debates. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All of the debate information is in the chat box, so please do sign up for them. I'll be looking forward to working with you both on them. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.